Janice couldn't help but smile that morning. Her steps felt lighter, her heart happier. After months of relentless deadlines and long workdays, she was finally nearing her much-needed vacation. Just one more week to go, and she'd be on a beach somewhere, sipping iced drinks, basking in the sun, and holding her husband's hand like they used to in the early days. It wasn't just any vacation. They had been planning this one for over a year. The Bahamas, their dream escape. That evening, after wrapping up her day at work, Janice felt unusually energetic. She imagined the two of them sitting down with a glass of wine, talking about which swimsuits to pack, and arguing playfully over who forgot to buy sunscreen again. With a contented sigh, she pulled into the driveway, opened the front door, and was immediately greeted by an unexpected sight, Sean's suitcase sitting in the hallway. A delighted grin spread across her face. "Well, look at you," she murmured to herself, amused. Sean had never been one for packing ahead of time. He'd usually throw things into a bag the night before a trip and complain about forgetting his toothbrush. But this time, he'd even packed the travel pillow she had once joked he'd never find again. "Sean, my love, I'm back," she called out cheerfully as she walked toward the kitchen, expecting to see him smiling. Maybe even holding a dinner plate in a rare attempt to surprise her. But what she saw made her freeze in her tracks. Sean was sitting at the table, dressed like he was ready to go somewhere formal. Not in his usual t-shirt and sweatpants, but a button shirt, slacks, leather shoes polished. A glass of wine sat untouched in front of him, and his expression was unreadable. The air between them turned thick in an instant. "Are you heading out?" she asked slowly, trying to understand. Sean exhaled deeply, looking at the wall instead of her. "I need to go, Janice. I need time to clear my head. I think I'm depressed." His words were like a sudden gust of cold air. Her joy disappeared. "Depressed?" she repeated, her voice soft but shaken. "Sean, we've been planning this vacation for months. Can't you wait one more week? We'll go together. We'll relax. That's the whole point." Sean finally looked at her, and the detachment in his eyes made her stomach twist. "You wouldn't understand. You have your bright office, your cheerful co-workers. I sit at home, feeling empty. I need peace. Now." Her eyes wandered back to the table. That's when she noticed something that made her heart drop. A bank transfer receipt. The amount was unmistakable. He had moved their shared vacation savings into his personal account. "Sean, we saved that money together. For both of us." His voice sharpened. "You don't get it. I'm suffocating. I've had enough of this dreary weather, this house, this routine. I need a break." "And I don't," she snapped, her voice trembling. "I've been counting the days, pushing through work, dreaming of this moment. You want to run off now because you feel down?" Sean stood abruptly, his tone now irritated. "Don't guilt me, Janice. I already booked the flight. I leave tonight." Her world spun. "Tonight?" He nodded. No apology. No regret. Just finality. "I have one favor to ask," he added, grabbing his suitcase. "Don't ruin this for me. I've already mentally left." And just like that, he kissed her cheek and walked out the door. Janice stood in silence, the sound of the closing door echoing louder than anything. Her fingers brushed against the cold wine glass he'd left behind, untouched, like her. The man she loved, the man she trusted, had just walked out without hesitation, and for the first time, Janice felt like a stranger in her own home. Janice stood in the hallway, her heart still racing from what had just unfolded. It felt like the walls were closing in, the air too heavy to breathe. Sean had walked out, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, and maybe permanently. He had chosen to leave her behind for a solo vacation, something they had always promised to do together. But what hurt the most wasn't that he left. It was how easily he did it. She wandered the house aimlessly, numb, staring at the suitcase he had dragged behind him, and then the wine glass he hadn't even touched. Maybe he would cool off and come back. Maybe it was just a moment of stress, a misunderstanding. Janice desperately wanted to believe that. Then she noticed it, Sean's phone, lying forgotten on the table. He always kept it glued to his side. But not tonight. For a few moments, she just stared at it. Her conscience waged a quiet war. Should she look? Would it even matter? But before she could decide, the screen lit up with a new message. "I'm already at the airport waiting for you. Babe, call me when you get there." Time froze. Janice's knees buckled slightly. Her hands trembled. Babe? That one word shattered whatever hope she had left. Her husband hadn't just left for a vacation. He wasn't depressed. He wasn't broken. He had lied, deceived, betrayed. There was another woman. All the odd signs she had ignored over the past few months suddenly made sense. His late nights, the coldness in his touch, the fake smiles, the quiet withdrawals, the way he'd started conversations and ended them in mid-sentence, the way he had stopped saying "I love you" altogether. She was never meant to go on that vacation. He had always intended to go alone, with her. The door creaked. Sean walked back in, casually, like nothing had happened. His eyes flicked to his phone, then to Janice. "Forgot this," he said, grabbing the phone without a second glance at her. He leaned in, pecked her on the cheek. "I've got a dash, love. Don't worry about anything." Dash? She couldn't believe his nerve, but she didn't say anything. Not yet. Not while her heart was pounding so loudly she could barely hear her own thoughts. Sean disappeared once more. This time, for real. Janice stood still for a beat, her face pale, her lips pressed together. Then, without thinking, she grabbed her coat, her bag, and called a cab. She had to go to the airport. She had to see it with her own eyes, even though a part of her already knew the truth. The cab ride was the longest journey of her life. She stared blankly out the window as the lights of the city passed her by, her reflection staring back at her, haunted and hollow. The driver asked her if she was okay. She nodded without meaning it. Her mind was spinning in a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sorrow, disbelief. When she arrived at the airport, her heart beat faster with every step. She didn't know where to look, but somehow, instinct guided her. And then, through the crowded terminal, she saw them. There he was, her husband, laughing. Next to him, a woman, young, vibrant, dressed in a flowy pink dress that fluttered with each movement. they weren't just traveling companions. Their closeness, their smiles, the way their fingers intertwined, it was unmistakable. They looked like teenagers in love. Janice's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes brimmed with tears. She watched from behind a pillar, the pain clawing at her chest. 5 years of marriage. 5 years of believing she was building something real. 5 years of loyalty. All gone in the blink of a moment. She wanted to scream, to cry, to march over and demand answers. But she didn't. She couldn't. Instead, she turned and walked away, her steps unsteady, her heart bleeding. The man she thought she knew, the man she once trusted, had become a stranger. Janice wandered the streets like a ghost, her thoughts spinning in a haze of heartbreak and disbelief. The cold night wrapped around her like a cruel joke, one more sharp reminder of the betrayal she had just witnessed. Her husband was off, hand in hand with another woman, headed for the vacation they had dreamed of together. And she? She was alone, stranded in the middle of her pain. Her heels clicked softly on the icy sidewalk as she made her way aimlessly away from the airport. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't care. The ache in her chest had numbed her to everything else. Eventually, her feet led her to a narrow alleyway blanketed in snow. It was quieter here. The buzzing terminals, the sounds of passing, cars, they all faded. There was only silence, the kind that echoed through her bones. Her legs, finally too weak to carry her any farther, gave way beneath her. She sank down onto a snow-dusted bench, folding her arms tightly across her chest. She sat there for minutes, or maybe hours. Time had stopped meaning anything. That's when she noticed him. A man sat hunched nearby, half buried in snow, almost like a statue. At first, she thought he might be asleep, or worse. But then she saw his chest rise and fall ever so faintly. His clothes were ragged, his shoes torn. His arms were wrapped tightly around his knees as if he were trying to hold himself together. He looked forgotten. Like someone the world had passed by long ago. Janice tried to look away. She had her own pain to deal with. She wasn't in any shape to take on someone else's. But something in the way he stared blankly into the distance, so hollow, so empty, called to her. On impulse, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a few crumpled bills. Walking over slowly, she bent down and held out the money. "Here," she said gently. "You can use this to get something warm." He didn't move, didn't even blink. I said, "Here," she repeated, her voice softer now, almost apologetic. Still, nothing. Frustrated, and perhaps needing something, anything to distract her from her own misery, she turned on her heel and marched toward a nearby cafe. A few minutes later, she returned with a cup of hot tea and a wrapped sandwich. She knelt down and offered them. "If you won't take the money, at least have this." He looked up slowly, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. In them, she saw something she recognized all too well: grief. Not hunger, not even shame. Just pure, unfiltered sorrow. He nodded once and accepted the tea, his hands trembling from the cold. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice hoarse and broken. Janice sat back down on the bench, watching the snow fall around them in silence. Strangely, sitting beside this stranger brought her a small flicker of comfort. For the first time that night, she didn't feel completely alone. When she stood up to leave, she hesitated. She looked at him again, still shivering as he sipped his tea. Then, against every logical thought, she spoke. "Would you like to come to my place? Just to warm up. Maybe take a shower, eat a proper meal." He blinked, surprised. "Are you serious?" "Yes," she nodded. "Why not?" He looked at her with cautious eyes. "I'm just a homeless man." "And I'm just a woman who got left behind," she replied, shrugging. "People are people." For a long moment he said nothing. Then finally he nodded. Janice stepped back onto the street and hailed a taxi. She helped him inside, ignoring the driver's raised eyebrows. In the silence of the ride, she glanced at the stranger beside her, someone who had no idea how broken she felt. But maybe, just maybe, they could help each other heal. The taxi was warm, but the atmosphere inside was awkward. The driver kept glancing in the rearview mirror, eyes flicking between Janice and the man she'd brought along. The man, still bundled in a borrowed scarf Janice had offered, stared quietly out the window. He didn't speak, and neither did she. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything still felt like a blur. When they finally arrived, Janice paid the fare with cash. The driver raised an eyebrow when she helped the man out of the car. "Are you sure you're bringing him into your house?" he muttered under his breath. Janice didn't answer. She didn't owe anyone an explanation. Inside, the warmth of her home wrapped around them like a soft blanket. The man paused at the doorway, visibly uncomfortable. "You can come in," Janice said gently. "There's a bathroom down the hall. Towels are in the cupboard, and there's a robe you can borrow. I'll warm up some food." He looked at her with disbelief, as though trying to understand what kind of person would do all this for someone like him. "Thank you," he finally whispered. "I don't even remember the last time I had a proper bath." Janice gave a small smile and turned toward the kitchen, giving him space. As she pulled out pots and pans, her hands moved automatically, chopping vegetables, stirring a stew, heating fresh bread. It had been so long since she had cooked with a sense of purpose. Not for someone who expected it, but because she wanted to. She had just finished setting the table when the bathroom door opened. She looked up and nearly dropped the ladle in her hand. The man standing in the doorway looked completely transformed. Clean-shaven, dressed in her ex-husband's robe, hair still damp from the shower. He looked nothing like the hollow-eyed figure she had found on the curb just an hour ago. "Wow," Janice said, unable to hide her surprise. He chuckled softly. "Yeah, I feel different too." They sat down to eat together, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Janice heard something she hadn't realized she'd been starving for. "This is delicious," the man said, savoring the first bite. "The spices, the flavor. It's been years since I tasted something made with real care." His words weren't just polite compliments. He meant them. She could tell. He noticed the subtle blend of herbs, the texture of the stew, the warmth of the bread. Every detail she'd poured into the meal. He saw it. And appreciated it. Janice didn't know why, but those simple words moved her more than she expected. She smiled softly, You're the first person in a long time who said that." He looked at her with quiet understanding. "Then someone's been taking you for granted." There was a long pause. Then Janice cleared her throat. "So, what's your name?" "Dylan," he said. "And thank you again. For everything." "Dylan," she repeated. "Nice to meet you." He glanced down at his plate. "I don't usually talk about myself, but I feel like I can with you." "I'd like to hear," she replied. Dylan's eyes clouded for a moment. 2 years ago, I had a wife, a daughter. We were driving on a rainy night. The car slipped. They didn't make it. I did." Janice felt her heart crack. "I've been punishing myself ever since," he continued. "I thought I didn't deserve help. Or kindness." Her eyes shimmered with tears. "You do," she said firmly. "We all do." That night, as they sat, in the warm kitchen surrounded by quiet and kindness, something shifted inside both of them. Two broken hearts had found each other, not in love, not yet, but in understanding. And sometimes, that's where healing truly begins. The silence between Janice and Dylan was no longer awkward. It was calming. It had become a space where both could breathe freely, without judgment or the need to wear masks. The warm lighting in the kitchen reflected softly off the walls, and the smell of the now empty plate still lingered in the air. For the first time in days, Janice didn't feel like she was drowning. Dylan, now sitting with a cup of tea between his hands, looked up at her. "You didn't ask why I've been living on the streets." "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready," Janice replied gently. His gaze dropped to the cup. "It's hard to talk about, but tonight I think I can." And he did. He spoke of the accident, how the rain had come down in sheets that night, how his wife had been humming a lullaby to their daughter in the back seat, how one sharp turn, one split second of hydroplaning, had turned joy into horror. The car had gone off the road and tumbled into darkness. Dylan had woken up in a hospital, with 2 broken ribs and a heart that would never be whole again. "I didn't even go to the funeral," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I couldn't face it. I blamed myself. I still do." Janice sat quietly, her hand over her mouth, tears prickling in her eyes. He went on, about the drinking, the isolation, the job he lost because he stopped showing up, how he shut out everyone who tried to help. How the house, once filled with laughter, became a graveyard of memories too painful to live with. "I gave up," Dylan said. "I walked out one day and never went back." Janice's voice was low but steady. "You didn't give up. You're here. You walked away from the pain, not from life." He looked at her, and in his eyes was the most fragile expression: hope. Faint but flickering. Then, as though gathering her own courage, Janice spoke. "You let me into your story," she said. "Now let me show you mine." She looked away for a moment, bracing herself, then back at him. "My husband left me today. For someone else. Took the money we saved together, booked a vacation with her, and walked out." Dylan's eyes widened. "I followed him to the airport," she continued. "Saw them together, laughing like I never existed." He stared at her, stunned. I'm so sorry." She let out a breath, half a laugh, half a sigh. And yet here I am, sharing food with a stranger and not falling apart. I don't even know how. Dylan nodded slowly. Sometimes, the people who break us also make space for others to help rebuild us. They sat in quiet understanding, two people shattered by life, now sitting at the edge of something new. Not romance, not yet, but maybe redemption. Then Dylan looked up. What will you do now? Janice hesitated, the weight of the question pressing down on her chest. I'm going to file for divorce. End it for good. But? She looked down at her hands. I don't know if he'll agree to it. I don't even know if I'm strong enough to fight him. Dylan leaned forward, his tone both gentle and firm. You already are strong. You faced him at the airport. You let a stranger into your home. You cooked a beautiful meal. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Like yours. Her throat tightened. No one had ever seen her like that before. Not even Sean. Dylan stood and took a slow breath. Get some rest. Tomorrow. We'll figure things out. Together. Janice didn't know why, but hearing the word together felt like someone placing a hand over her heart, steadying it. And that night, as she lay on the couch under a soft blanket, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Wasn't the end of the pain, but maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of healing. The days following Dylan's stay at Janice's house were like a strange dream, both comforting and unsettling. She had woken up the next morning, still in a state of disbelief that someone like him, a stranger with his own tragedy, had entered her life just when she needed someone the most. And yet, the bond they shared in those quiet, difficult hours had shifted something inside her. The weight of Sean's betrayal still lingered in her chest, but it didn't feel as heavy. The words Dylan had spoken about strength, about redemption, continued to echo in her mind. Over the next few days, Janice busied herself with work, but it was hard to concentrate. Sean had left. The divorce papers were still in her bag. She had planned to file them the moment she could gather the courage. But every time she sat down to do it, something stopped her. A voice inside her kept whispering that it wasn't just the paperwork that needed to be dealt with. It was the emotional wreckage of 5 years. Dylan had said they would figure things out together, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like someone was there for her. It wasn't a romantic gesture, at least not yet, but the way he had stood beside her during those raw moments felt like more than just kindness. It felt like a new kind of family, born out of shared pain, understanding, and the promise of something different. That afternoon, Janice came home to find Dylan, sitting on her doorstep, a bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. His usual worn-out jacket had been replaced by a crisp white shirt and dark jeans. He looked like a completely different man. "Hey," he said with a grin. "I thought I'd stop by. These flowers seemed a bit more cheerful than the ones I picked up last time." Janice blinked in surprise. "Flowers?" Dylan held them out. To her. "I've been meaning to thank you for letting me stay here, and for not thinking I was completely crazy." She laughed softly and took the flowers from him, her fingers brushing his in the process. It was the first time she had smiled since that terrible day at the airport. The gesture felt so simple, yet so meaningful. She looked at him with a grateful expression. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice sincere. "But thank you." Dylan chuckled, shrugging. "I'm not great with words, but I know this. Sometimes when you least expect it, someone comes into your life and gives you exactly what you needed. Even if you didn't know it at the time." Janice's heart skipped a beat. She had always believed that kindness was a fleeting thing, here one moment, gone the next. But Dylan had shown her that it could last longer if you were brave enough to open yourself to it. "Dylan," she started, unsure how to continue. "I'm still figuring this all out. I'm not even sure what comes next. But," he raised his hand, silencing her gently. "You don't need to figure it out all at once, Janice. Just take one step at a time. You've already made the hardest part, facing the truth." A silence passed between them, one that felt comfortable rather than awkward. She thought about Sean, about the man who had been everything to her, and yet who had turned his back without so much as a second glance. The man who didn't care enough to fight for their future. "And what about you?" Janice asked, her voice a little shaky. "What happens to you now?" Dylan's smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of determination. "I'm not who I used to be. I've done a lot of things I regret, Janice. But the last thing I want to do now is let my past keep me from moving forward. You've helped me remember that." There was a strange stillness between them now. Janice felt it too. The quiet connection, the shared understanding. But she wasn't ready. Not. Yet she needed more time. She needed space to breathe without the weight of betrayal crushing her chest every time she thought of Sean. "I'm not ready for anything yet," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Dylan nodded. "And you shouldn't be. Take your time. I'll be here when you're ready." His words were not an invitation to rush into anything but an offer to wait, patiently, and that made all the difference. As Janice stepped back inside, the door closing behind her, she couldn't help but feel lighter, not because everything had magically fixed itself, but because for the first time in a long time, she was starting to believe that there was more to life than the pain she had endured. There was hope, and there was a future. Dylan might not have been the answer to all her questions, but he had been a catalyst for change, a reminder that kindness, when given without expectation, could heal wounds. She wasn't quite sure where this journey would take her. Toward forgiveness, toward independence, or even toward a future with someone new. But for the first time, she felt like she was moving forward, and that was enough. The following days passed in a quiet whirl of new possibilities. Janice had never imagined that a single meeting with a stranger could shift everything she thought she knew about herself and her life. But Dylan's presence in her world had done just that. Not in any overwhelming romantic way, not yet at least, but in a subtle, reassuring manner. His patience and kindness had become the foundation for something Janice hadn't realized she needed. Hope, though still reeling from Sean's betrayal. Janice began to feel a new strength stir within her. She wasn't the woman who had spent years silently accepting a marriage that no longer fulfilled her. She was learning to stand up for herself, to protect her own happiness, and to choose what was best for her, no matter how difficult that path might be. One evening, as the winter sun dipped below the horizon, Janice returned home from work to find Dylan waiting for her outside. He was standing by the fence, hands in his pockets, looking casual yet thoughtful, as if he had been waiting for just the right moment. "Hey," Janice greeted, her lips curling into a smile. She had started looking forward to seeing him every day, even if just for a short conversation. "Hey," Dylan replied with a smile of his own. But there was something different in his gaze tonight, a quiet intensity. "I was thinking," he started, pausing as if searching for the right words. "You've been through a lot. I know you're still processing everything, but I want you to know that I'm here for you, in whatever way you need, whether that's just as a friend or something more." Janice's heart fluttered slightly at the idea of more. It wasn't that she hadn't felt an undeniable connection with him. She had. It was the timing. She wasn't sure if she was ready to open her heart again after everything with Sean. But Dylan's sincerity was undeniable, and a part of her wanted to take that leap. "I don't know if I'm ready," Janice admitted, her voice soft but firm. "I still need time to heal. I have to rebuild my life. I don't want to rush into anything, not yet." Dylan nodded without hesitation, his expression calm and understanding. "I get that. I'm not in a rush. I just wanted you to know that I'm here, and if you ever do want something more, something different, I'll be here too." Her heart softened at his words. The fact that he wasn't pressuring her, wasn't trying to move things forward faster than she could handle, was a relief. It was the kind of respect she had always deserved but hadn't received from her marriage. Sean had always rushed through life without thinking of her feelings, without considering her needs. Dylan, on the other hand, was patient, grounded, and above all, kind. Janice stood there for a moment, staring at the man who had unexpectedly come into her life, offering her not just a shoulder to lean on, but the space to grow. She realized then that Dylan was more than just a temporary reprieve from her pain. He was the mirror reflecting back the person she was beginning to become, strong, independent, and deserving of something more. "Thank you," Janice said finally, her voice steady, "for everything. I'm not sure where this is going, but I'm glad you're here." Dylan smiled, his face lighting up with a warmth that reached all the way into her chest. "I'm glad I'm here too," he said softly, as the weeks passed. Janice continued to work through the emotional wreckage of her marriage. She filed the divorce papers, and with each passing day, the weight lifted just a little more. She started taking care of herself, doing things that made her happy again. Simple things like painting, cooking meals for herself, and listening to music while cleaning her house. The quiet moments with Dylan continued too. They shared small conversations over tea, walks through the park, and the occasional dinner out. They didn't rush anything. It wasn't about romance. It was about connection, about trust, about two people finding solace in each other's presence, without the pressure of expectations. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Janice walked into her house and froze in the doorway. There, sitting on her couch, was Dylan, holding a small box. His eyes met hers with a mixture of nervousness and sincerity. "Janice," he said softly, "I've been thinking. If I could offer you anything, it would be this. My commitment, my respect, my patience. Not as some grand gesture, but as a promise. That I'll be here for you, however you need me to be. Whether that means we remain friends or something more." Janice's breath caught in her throat. She stepped closer, the words she had been holding back rising to her lips. She realized in that moment that the choice wasn't about Dylan. It was about her. It was about her healing, her future. "I think I'm ready," she whispered. Dylan smiled, and in that simple, heartfelt smile, Janice saw her future. A future where she wasn't defined by her past, but by the strength she'd found within herself. And together, they took the first step toward something new.